Welcome to Day 10 of Western Civilization. Today we're going to focus on religion and politics in Christian Europe. Now, Day 9 discussed kind of the movement of Christianity early on. Today we're going to look at Christianity as it becomes more of a central authority in Western Europe. Notable locations today are Constantinople and Rome. These are two locations that you should be pretty familiar with at this point in this class. Some notable dates to keep in mind are 476 to 1453. This is generally kind of the ballpark range for what we refer to as the Dark Ages that we've discussed previously in this class. The new date that I would make a mental note of somewhere, somehow, some way, is 1054 CE. This is the date of the Great Schism, and we'll talk about what the Great Schism is within Christianity. It's the big division, the first true division between what will become the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. Now, some of the stuff we're going to talk about today is very familiar because we have already kind of introduced it in previous lessons. So, let's get right into it, shall we? Now, long after the disappearance of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire kind of served as the dominant power in the East. Medieval Europe was kind of this political mosaic of a lot of independent states that were competing for regional powers and such. So if you take a look at this map, again, you can kind of see the Byzantine Empire, and this would be after Justinian tries to regain some of the lost territories in the West. Kind of gets there, not really to the extent of what the Roman Empire had in this portion of Europe. However, you can see again the Eastern Mediterranean and North Africa, the Byzantine Empire is the dominant political force. And it's going to stay that way until 1453. And you've seen this before, I believe. If we look at Europe and kind of what that looks like, this eventually is kind of what's going to become, after the Byzantine Empire loses a little bit of its power, but you can see that there's a lot of competing city-states in medieval Europe with different political agendas and philosophies. Feel free to pause any time and just kind of familiarize yourself with what the map looks like here, and this would be kind of around maybe the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries. And compare that with modern Europe today. You can see some very similar states that still exist, and you can see some stark contrasts as well. Alright, so after the fall of Rome, which is 476 CE, we see a lot of Germanic tribes that take control of former Roman lands. And essentially when this happens, the rule of Roman law is non-existent because there's no one really to enforce it. So therefore, by default, the Roman Catholic Church, which Roman Catholic means the universal church in Rome, remained intact. And this was kind of the central authority for any kind of remnant of law and order. Again, I just mentioned that, but Catholic, the word Catholic means in Greek universal or all-inclusive, basically meaning that Christianity was centered in that location. Alright, so life in a post-Roman world wasn't really the greatest. Okay, one of the biggest things that kind of produced the Dark Ages was a lack of education. Now, books perished because, books are books, and if they're not preserved, they're not going to survive very well. They were burned, they were lost in raids, okay, and a lot of these were just very notable religious ideas and philosophies. And so therefore, in an absence of knowledge in some kind of educational system, people aren't learning. So anytime you have a society that is not educated, you're not going to see a whole lot of progress. Case in point, why education is vitally important to the survival of our civilization. So this contributed to what we refer to as the Dark Ages. And why do we call it the Dark Ages? It's just an absence of worldly knowledge. This cycle seems to go periodically throughout the annals of history. Now, the Catholic Church was the source of knowledge for what was there, so they were kind of the filter, if you will. The clergy were kind of the rare few individuals who were literate and educated, so therefore the stuff that they were disseminating to the masses was definitely biased towards more of a faith-based religious knowledge. So a lot of non-religious texts were omitted and not shared. So if you want to think of it in some kind of visual, the Catholic Church kind of became the information highway, where pagan philosophies, science, and technologies of kind of the classical age in history were omitted and forgotten by this chunk of the population. However, there are other people that we'll talk about later in this unit that do take some of those classical ideas and harbor them and kind of keep them alive, and eventually will reintroduce them to society. Now, the church had a strong say in Western Europe in secular politics. We've looked at this as we talked about the Holy Roman Empire. We've talked about this with Charlemagne, all right, and a lot of monarchies as well. So the king or queens that align with the church kind of have an advantage because they can tap into the religious connection of the large Christian populations in Europe. And you can take a look at some of the other Frankish tribes and the countries they will become to kind of support this idea. Now, by doing this, the church was supported with land, political positions, and influential laws. So really it was beneficial for the church to get involved in a lot of these political matters. Now, a dark spot on the history of Christianity kind of also exists within the medieval ages of European history. Now, some of these church directives were a little more coercive than anything else. So a lot of times what you see is maybe some forced worship and forced conversions that happen. You see increased tithing or giving of money to the church, and some repression of anti-church influences. And we'll talk more about that, especially when we get to the Crusades later in this unit. But the good thing, if you want to think of it from a Christian point of view, about the spread of Christianity under the central authority of the church is that virtually all of Europe becomes Christianized in some way or another. So the question becomes, does the end justify the means? And also what we see is that the Pope is becoming increasingly powerful. He's becoming a very influential political entity in European matters and politics. Now, with this growth of power in Western Europe, there is a rivalry that does emerge between the churches in Rome and Constantinople. And so the Pope and the Byzantine religious authorities, they send missionaries kind of into these quote-unquote barbaric lands. In Byzantine, they're going to look to the north in a lot of Slavic states. In Rome, they're going to also look to the north in some of these Germanic tribes and so on and so forth. But essentially, these two churches profess the same basic Christian doctrine for the most part. Now, friction is going to emerge between the two churches roughly around the 6th century. One of the initial points was the contention of the worship of icons, which essentially were taking kind of these ideas contained within the religious text, and they're depicting them in things that are carved, things that are crafted so you can see the image and stuff like that, and then worshiping to that icon as kind of a medium or a reminder of what the text or religious doctrine is. So there is a point of contention when Emperor Leo goes on this, or implements this philosophy, or this directive called iconoclasm, which essentially means breaking of the icons, and not to kind of worship these idols. Various disagreements emerged following that too, everything from beards to type of bread that is used in service, and in addition the interpretation of what the Holy Trinity is, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Now eventually tensions get so bad in 1054 that the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Pope of Rome mutually excommunicate one another. And what that means is they basically bar one another from religious services that each church would provide. So with this excommunication, what we see, and we've generally referred to this as the Great Schism, we see the development of the Roman Catholic Church in the West. And again, you can kind of see in this map, this would be the Roman Catholic Church, the Universal Church. And then in the East, we call that the Eastern Orthodox Church. And this would be kind of the Church of Constantinople. And so a couple of the driving forces that we've already talked about, in addition to those, is that the Roman Catholic Church wanted to regain some control over Christianity, or all control over Christianity, where the Eastern Church wanted to kind of rise to the status of equals. And so it's really kind of this power struggle between both churches to kind of have the primary say over Christian doctrine. Now, what we see with this is that we have the original Christian doctrine here, okay? And here, 1054, here's the first great schism. And so we have the Eastern Orthodox Church, based in Constantinople, that continues on. And then we have the Roman Catholic Church that will continue on here. And in our next unit, I believe, we're going to get to this point, which is the Reformation. If you've heard of a guy named Martin Luther, this is where, or John Calvin, this is where they kind of come into play. Okay, but eventually this will be the next split, and we can see over the course of church history that you have tons of divisions that eventually will happen between different thoughts and ideologies within Christianity. Okay, and that concludes our discussion on religion and politics in Christian Europe. And tomorrow we're going to transition. We're going to talk more about the development of the Islamic influence in the world history, specifically as it relates to Western civilization. And so that is kind of prepping the stage. We're going to go to at the end of this unit and look at these two superpowers in terms of their ideologies and when they clash in a period of time we like to refer to as the Crusades.